All righty. Well, hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Monterey Bay Aquarium and the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institutes here live all across the internet. My name is Patrick. I'm right here in the middle. Welcome, everybody. And here is our wonderful panel of wonderful folks from not only, looks like we've got one more expert that's wanting to come into the room here. Looks like Kira has just decided to come on in. We'll welcome her into the chat. And we'll see what kind of Zoom background she has set up already. But so I'm Patrick. I'm right here in the middle. Hello, everybody on YouTube, on Twitch, on Facebook, on Twitter, and Periscope. Hope I'm not forgetting anyone. Thank you, everyone, for being there. If anything breaks during this live stream on a technical front, that'll be my fault. And then down over here on this side, we've got the better half of the social media team here at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. That is Emily. Emily, how you doing today?
I am doing fantastic, Patrick. Just getting everything set up on my end so that I can look at all the wonderful questions that I'm sure that folks will be sending in to us today.
Excellent. And so then right below me here is George Matsumoto from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, or MBARI there. Then over to this side is Cassie. And then down over here, over there, I'll figure it out one of these days. Over here is Kira. Kira, George, and Cassie are going to be the intrepid folks out there on the social media feeds answering all of your questions here live as we go. So send us your questions, and if you see George, Cassie, and Kira answering those questions on Facebook and Twitter, etc., that's those folks over here. But over to the opposite side of me, over here is our esteemed guest for today. It is Dr. Steve Litvin. I'm going to spotlight your video right there. Hey, Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking to you for today about the science of the changing sea that we have all around our planet there. But before we get started, we're going to do our classic intro to everyone of what's going on. So Emily and I work for the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which you may have visited. It's got the fishes, the kelp forest, etc. And the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, or MBARI, is a research facility that is located about 20 miles north of the aquarium in Moss Landing. And I'll pull up some neat little videos of that. Hold on, let me just get my production all lined up. Nice. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, or MBARI, is located at the mouth of the Monterey Submarine Canyon, which is a very, very exciting feature on our planet. You can see it right here in this animation. Monterey there to the left, Moss Landing there in the center. And coming out from Moss Landing is this canyon that goes down 2 miles deep. So the canyon itself is a mile deep from the rim to the bottom, sort of like having the Grand Canyon underwater. And then there's another mile of water that is above that. And so the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute is located in a perfect position to be able to go out into that world and explore the deep ocean. Here is one of those research vessels that you may sometimes see out there in the Monterey Bay. Aboard those research vessels are vehicles known as ROVs, or remotely operated vehicles. This one here is called the Ventana, and that is traditionally how we've been showing you in these Mysteries of the Deep programs, these deep sea environments with those cameras there on those ROVs. But what's important also for you folks to know out there is that MBARI is not just about the deep sea. MBARI is about using technology, engineers, and scientists working together to study the entirety of the ocean, the ocean system. And so we've got lots of other systems and experiments going on to study overall oceanography, figuring out what's going on out there around the world in bodies of water, sometimes not even salt water out there. So there's so much more research that's going on in MBARI. We focus very heavily on what's happening in the deep sea, but there is so much science that is going on, and that is why we have Dr. Steve here with us today, because we're going to be talking about some of the larger big picture science that's happening from the deep sea, but then also to the near shore there. And so without further ado, let's see if I can get Steve up here highlighted. So Steve, did I do an okay job introducing a little bit of what we're doing here?
Oh, you did a great job. I think better than I would have done.
Okay, awesome. So can you tell us, well, let's see. It looks like we might be having some issues over on Facebook. But Steve, while we try to get Facebook going, can you tell us a little bit about your job at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute? What is it that you do out there?
So I'm a senior research specialist in the benthic ecology group led by MBARI. And we're really just interested in how our natural environment shapes the marine communities we see, particularly benthic communities on the bottom of the ocean. So that both encompasses how the natural variability we see in our ocean. So being out here on the West Coast, we have something called upwelling, like every spring, cold, deep water comes up to the near shore, full of nutrients. That's why we have big kelp forests here and productive fisheries, but also that brings cold, low pH, low dissolved oxygen water. So that variability shapes our community. So we're interested in how that type of variability and sort of variability due to climate change in the future will affect the ocean.
That's excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've got behind you on your Zoom background? Because we're going to be using some of Zoom's incredible features that I'm sure everybody out there is familiar with these digital backgrounds here. Can you tell us a little bit about what your background is right now? What's that kind of science that you got going on there?
So this really highlights that interplay between engineers and science at MBARI. So this is from some of our deep water coral work. So not everybody out there might know, but there are corals in the deep ocean, just like there's corals in shallow coral reefs. And we're really interested in why we see really robust communities of coral some places, and there's some sponges in there too, they're yellow, and why we don't see them other places. And that big thing sitting to my left is essentially a big time-lapse camera system that has some really neat features. So that's sitting about 1,200 meters down. So that's about 3,600 feet down at a system called Sur Ridge off of Big Sur. It's a ridge system that's full of corals and sponges. And we just recently deployed that in March. And it will be taking pictures of a coral community for more than a year, about every hour.
Wow, that's awesome. I've got some of that coral there that you might be filming there behind you there on the production side. And then here, let's see if I can just put all of us full screen again. So Steve, actually that device that you have right there next to you is something that ROV pilot Ben Irwin talked about. He did a 3D scan of that. So for those of you folks who may have seen some of the productions we've done here previously, go back and find ROV pilot Ben Irwin's episode, or go to MBARI's Sketchfab. So go to Sketchfab and then search for MBARI, and you'll find, oh, there it is right there. Ooh, Steve's got, there it is. Nice. So this was a little talk that we did with some of that technology there. So you can actually have this view in your VR headset if you have one of those, or you can zoom around it in 3D in your web browser and you can see this huge boulder there in front of you. And Steve, that's awesome that you had that queued up. We didn't even prepare that. That was perfect.
Yeah. And for those of you who are thinking about how big this rock is, the coral cam is about 7-8 feet tall. So you can think about how big those corals are and how big that rock is.
That's very cool. So with that, we've been talking. Wow, I can't even believe it. Already we've been streaming for almost 10 minutes here, Steve. But I did want to highlight, let's see, let's get Emily up there. Emily, there's some folks out there, I'm sure, that are asking some many questions out there. Can you tell us a little bit about what the folks want to know out there? We'll start throwing Steve some questions here.
Yeah, so we've got people tuning in all across the internet with us right now. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much to the folks over on Facebook who stuck with us through some technical difficulties right at the beginning of this stream. We're very glad to have you here joining us right now. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the job that you are doing right now? We have lots of folks who are curious and very excited about deep sea exploration and love the jobs of the many wonderful guests that we've had on stream. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into deep sea marine science?
Yeah, well, my journey was actually pretty gradual. You know, I first probably got interested in marine science as a kid when I lived on the campus of the University of British Columbia. And I remember going out with a bunch of students into the intertidal. And that really sort of got me rolling. I went through my typical kid shark period, but I ended up getting a PhD working in salt marshes, on the East Coast with juvenile fish. And while that sounds really distant from working in the deep sea, really what interests me and what I love to think about is how organisms interact with their environment and interact with other organisms to sort of shape what we see out there, to shape ecosystems. And so my work from the East Coast brought me here to California, where I started working on climate change questions in the near shore. And when an opportunity arose here to work at MBARI on similar questions, both in the near shore and in the deep, I jumped at it. I've always, I shouldn't say always, in the second half of my career, I worked a lot on that intersection of you leveraging engineering to ask scientific questions. So I was especially excited about that coming to MBARI.
That's excellent. I just wanted to, I see in our chat here. And I just spotlit myself. That's why there's that in front of me. Steve, there's a really awesome question from former staff at the aquarium. Want to say hello. Hey, Raynell, Pauline. Hey, Raynell. Thanks for being there. She has a question in the chat. What is the process of installing that huge device that you have there behind you? What kind of difficulties is there in trying to do some science when you need to get this huge hunk of tech down into the deep and make sure that it's still functional? Can you tell us about that install?
So that's one of the cool things about MBARI. So there's something really particular about this that gives us a lot of functionality. So this is us on the deck about to deploy the camera trap. And we literally dump it over the side. And
just chuck it.
Yeah. Well, we don't chuck it.
Okay. All right.
We have very skilled people on the flyer who gently put it over and let it go, and it slowly sinks to the bottom. And then actually the dock rickets picks it up and flies it to the location we want. But you might imagine that, that's not a gigantic camera. We're seeing a couple feet by a couple of feet. So we might be really particular about where we want to point it. So the engineers we work with took an extra step and gave us the capability to plug the dock rickets into the camera and take some photos, adjust the camera settings. Please don't ask me to talk about camera settings, not my expertise.
Oh, I was going to ask like ISO and, et cetera. Okay, that's fine. No, moving on. That's okay. Sorry, shutterbugs out there.
Yeah, so basically once we get it on the bottom, this is actually a tilt mechanism. And this is the view we get while plugged into the dock rickets. So we can then tilt the camera, change some of the settings. And when we're satisfied, because we're going to leave it there for a year, we unplug it, leave it in place, and the dock rickets goes off. And, I'll tell you in December, hopefully, how it turned out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had some video of the dock rickets, that ROV playing there in the background, so folks know one of those remotely operated vehicles. But yeah, so tell us a little bit. You're plugging your ROV into the, and like if anyone knows electronics and saltwater don't mix very well. So pretty incredible stuff that you've got going on there. Plugging sensors in, connecting back to the ship, and adjusting your camera angle. Really amazing.
Yeah, and you got to give it up to the flyer pilots too, because you got to think we're 1,200 meters down. We go through all this engineering and all this effort to look at a particular coral, and they have to gently unplug this and not move the camera while they're doing it. So that's not a simple feat.
Yeah, and I've got the flyer there behind you right now, Steve, so that folks know there's that research vessel. So the pilots have to do amazing work with the ROV. The ship captains have to keep the boat together. So really, really amazing stuff. That's always the fun science. Love to hear about from you all. All right, going back to the grid view. Emily, what kind of questions do the folks have out there?
Yeah, we had a great question here from over on Facebook. Um, have you ever seen environmental damage due to drilling in our ocean, Steve? A lot of folks concerned, especially about some of the environmental or the changes in environmental laws that have happened recently.
Yeah, personally, I haven't worked in any systems where drilling is prominent. So I haven't firsthand, either shallow or deep. It's just something I haven't particularly worked on.
Gotcha. But some of the things that we are going to be talking about with you are related to changing oceans and human impact. So maybe that's a good transition point. Thank you for that question, Alice. But can you we can maybe transition into a little bit of that research that you're doing, Steve, with the rest of the folks there about some of our changing ocean out here. So whichever way you feel like going with it, like let us know. Project 1 or Project 2, up to you.
Let's start with let's go back shallow a little bit.
Okay.
Let's go
A deeper understanding about shallow things is
shallow.
where we're
Yeah.
headed. Okay.
So we work here. I mentioned that we are in an upwelling system, and I'm going to just let this little video play in the background. So along California and in a lot of places in the world, like Peru and the southern part of Africa, in the spring, winds blow along the shore, and because of a combination of how those winds and how the earth spins, literally the top waters of the ocean get pushed offshore, and these cold, deep waters get pulled up to the surface near shore. And those have a lot of nutrients. We get a lot of productivity. That's the Peruvian anchovy fishery, our kelp forests. And this introduces a lot of variability into the ecosystem. It's variability in temperature, dissolved oxygen, and pH. So we're really interested how this variability will change in the future and how that might affect marine ecosystems. So, really basically, we think in the future, it'll be a little warmer, it'll be more acidic, there'll be lower pH, and we'll have lower dissolved oxygen. And we've been using abalone as sort of, I don't want to say our lab rat, but the species that we've been doing a lot of work on, because this is an abalone. For those of you who don't know abalone, it's a flat snail. It's also happens to be a tasty flat snail. So it's really important in aquaculture around the world. There's still commercial fisheries for it, though not in California. And we work on them because they sort of give us a lot of levers to play with when we think about how temperature and dissolved oxygen pH will affect animals in the ocean.
And just Steve, just for if anyone's tuning in on Twitch or on YouTube who's familiar with the aquarium's live streams of Animal Crossing, we've been playing this video game. I don't know if you're familiar, Steve, Animal Crossing. And in that game, there is an abalone, and it might even be a red abalone like this species. So if you folks are interested in finding out some abalone facts or things like that, we've actually been doing some talks. So abalone is having its 15 minutes for sure in video game and lore out there. So in case anyone out there is playing Animal Crossing, go find some abalone, go dive for them, and you'll see exactly what Steve is referencing. Okay, back to you.
And as you knew, they're super fun to dive with because you can feed them kelp, and they're really cute. But we use abalone from aquaculture in our research. We get a lot of help from the Monterey Abalone. They support us quite a bit. And, they're really fun to sort of think about doing work on them because when they're juveniles and adults, they're sort of crawling around on the bottom. They move, but they don't move too far. So something about the habitat they're in. But they also have sort of cool reproduction. They fertilize in the water. So they have sperm and egg that go into the water and fertilize, and then they float around for a little bit, going from a soft larvae to forming a shell, and then after about, let's say 14 days, they find a rock to settle on, and they settle and they turn into the abalone we know. And so we might think that there's a lot of sensitivity early on with these species to things like temperature and particularly pH, because they have to form shells, and the lower the pH, the harder it is to form a shell. So this idea of how future ocean acidification, lower pH, might affect them is particularly interesting to us. But we have, again, these systems they live in are really variable, so we want to do the experiments in that context. And this is where the MBARI part comes in. We don't always spend a ton of time in the lab doing these kind of experiments, but because we wanted to simulate that upwelling, that's where it took MBARI resources. So what we wanted to do was, if here's sort of natural variability, you see all these ups and downs, our engineers wrote software and built us a system that lets us simulate that in the lab.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so that takes software engineering, electrical engineering, all sorts of feedbacks. That's Charles Bach. He's was a postdoc here. He's now working on endangered white abalone down in San Diego. So we've been looking at how upwelling and today and in the future will be affecting fertilization, larval development, and juvenile growth, and growth of shells and growth of tissue, so growth in general.
That's awesome. And Steve, I just want to point out that these are some legit graphs that you're bringing to the table here. You know, for the folks out there that are tuning in. Here, let's see if I can get everybody back up on screen here. For the folks that are tuning in, this is really something that, like, as someone who works for the aquarium, talking to visitors and people, Steve, this is always the really cool thing about finding out what MBARI is working on, is because you're coming up with so many amazing systems and technologies to study something that, you know, at the aquarium, here's the abalone over here, but then there's so much complexity to the life of an abalone, and then you're able to recreate some of that with those experiments. So that's really cool. I know that people probably have a lot of questions. So Emily, I wanted to go to you. What kind of questions do we have here at the moment about this work?
Yeah, people curious kind of about the experiment itself. How is it going? Yeah, any kind of update with that there, Steve?
Yeah, and I think the big take home is the future isn't completely bleak. And
oh, that's good to hear.
Okay.
Okay.
that we were all holding.
Yeah, you heard it here on the aquarium and MBARI social media feeds first. Everything isn't horrible.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
nice.
Of course, because I'm a scientist, I'm going to say it's a little complicated. So it definitely, we feel, you know, we're seeing things like very far future predicted low pH is going to make it really hard for abalone to be able to fertilize, for that sperm and egg to get together and successfully fertilize, for the larvae to develop. I'll just show you a quick picture of, you know, this is some of Charlie's work, where if we look at larvae after about 9 days under current conditions, under these current upwelling conditions, they're starting to form shells. They're sort of starting to look like little abalone, but under, you know, far future, what we call business as usual, sort of, if all of the trends keep going how they go, you know, you see a lot less successful development. But on the other hand, we're seeing with fertilization and with juvenile growth that maybe conditions 20 years from now, the increasing temperatures might actually be a bit of a bonus. They might offset some of the negative effects of the decreasing pH. So the near term sort of prediction is more mixed. There's some positives, there's some negatives, and we have some buffer of time to have a chance that if we don't continue business as usual, that we have resiliency built into these ecosystems. And that's really what we want to know, is how resilient are they? How much sort of a pounding can they take and still do what they do?
That's it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because that's so similar to, I mean, the work that we do with sea otters at the aquarium is about resiliency and coastal resiliency. And we see it in Elkhorn Slough, like right next to where you are with the work there. So that idea of a resilient ecosystem that can buffer these changes it's yeah, cool to hear. It's all that same thing. Emily, more questions.
Yeah, I know that we talk about resiliency so much at the aquarium in so many different ways. So, I mean, this is just, it's so fascinating to listen to, just as someone who communicates about this all the time, seeing that data before our eyes of the resiliency of the ocean. But Steve, I'm sure that there are folks out there who are curious of, when we talk about this resiliency, there is a point of no return. I've seen a question come up here. Um, Again, that kind of makes it sound very bleak, but in your opinion, what are some things that we can do to kind of keep ourselves from reaching that point of no return?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean,
And if you need to sit down or,
Yeah.
just like
I need a coffee
break
and a
out,
cracker.
break out a pipe and just kind of,
Coffee, yeah.
let us know,
Yeah, it's clear. There's a lot of variability in the ocean. They're very, they're as we talked about upwelling. You can just see they're incredibly variable systems. There's a lot of resiliency. All these organisms have their tipping points, and then what we know less about is how ecosystems have tipping points, because all these animals are, and plants and animals and phytoplankton are connected. It's clear that pH is going down because CO2 is going up, and there's a lot of people working on those questions, and those are really big questions that go beyond the science I do. But clearly the increasing CO2 is having an effect. Clearly the increasing temperature is having an effect. I think for those of us who scuba dive, seeing fish from down south in California a little more than we used to is an indicator of that. So, but everybody does matter. So all of us being a little better, my favorite one is the 2-mile rule, trying to not, ride your bike or walk if things are within 2 miles, is sort of my little thing I try to do. But it'll all help.
Yeah, I think to that point, the science that you're doing and that MBARI is doing, and the work that we do at the aquarium, it's part of that ecosystem of understanding how our world works. And it's important to know that individual action builds up to community action, builds up to country level, planet level action. So as everybody out there is on social media, like what you do in your everyday life is important. And also, as everybody is learning about how the resilience of people and communities work, getting involved with your communities and your larger ecosystem is that big thing there. I don't know if you meant to transition into this, but about the diving aspect, but there is some science that I think that we should talk about, because I was very fortunate to be invited to help dive on some of this. George and I did a dive on this particular project that you were working on. And then for the folks that might be watching the Monterey Bay Cam, which there's usually about 100 folks on YouTube watching the Monterey Bay Cam every day, sometimes the camera pans to the beach and you see some cables at a low tide sticking out from the beach, and those are actually connected to some science that you're doing. So I don't mean to transition you hard over there, but it seemed like a good segue there.
It's a great point. And I'll throw up a quick map. I don't have a lot of super cool graphics from this, but this is what's called the nearshore FOS. FOS is free carbon, I hope I get it, free ocean carbon enrichment,
Yes.
which are a series of, it's sort of, it's a concept. It's doing ocean acidification experiments, not by setting the pH at 7.8, but rather doing experiments in the ocean. And there's all this natural variability. Could be here it's upwelling, other places it could be mostly driven by tides. And you offset the pH lower relative to that background and do the experiments in the ocean. So this was designed at MBARI. People have taken the design and done things all over the world. And our FOS system here that we're working on is actually right next to the aquarium. So you mentioned those cables that are going out. Basically, we have what's essentially a USB hub at about 15 meters depth off of the kelp forest next to the aquarium. And that provides us power and communications. And we also have a hose that runs in CO2 enriched low pH seawater out to it. And there isn't, our experiments removed right now. We're actually re-engineering it and plan to put it back in next year. But we have up to 4 chambers out there that for us to do experiments in. So that same kind of software I showed you about the lab experiments, we use that same software to control the pH in these chambers on the bottom next to the aquarium. So that's about 6 feet long and a couple feet wide. And what's neat, it allows us to also not just do experiments about how individual species respond to changes in pH, but gives us sort of the space to look at how species interactions change due to changes in pH.
That's excellent. Yeah. So for the folks out there that might be watching that Monterey Bay cam, when it pans over to the beach and you see the red cable there, those are connected to some science out in the ocean and back on shore at Hopkins Marine Station, which is right next door to the aquarium as well. So Steve, thanks for answering that question for the folks that might be watching that cam. Speaking of answering questions, Emily, what do the folks want to know out there?
Well, I know that I threw it to a very deep question last time, so I figured we'd go a little bit lighter on the topic.
We're in the near shore, Emily. Remember, we're about shallow things here.
Yeah, we're talking about less high stakes question for you right now. I don't know. Maybe it's a very high stakes question right now for you, Steve. Through studying the ocean and stuff, we just spent a little while talking about abalones. Folks are curious. We have a lot of abalone fans out there. Are abalones your favorite ocean animal, or do you have a different favorite ocean animal?
I'm going to make someone not happy.
Oh, you're going to get yourself in so much trouble, Steve.
They've grown on me. They're really cute. I had a favorite abalone, actually. Before here, I worked at Hopkins Marine Station, and for about 2 years, we did, every month we went out and surveyed a transect in the kelp forest. And for that whole 2 years, there was one crevice with a big urchin and a big abalone that never moved. They were friends. They lived in that crevice. We'd feed them every time. So I think that abalone as an individual is my favorite sea creature ever, because I got to know it very well.
Well, and it's good to know too that abalone with its friend urchin was not abalonely out there on the reef, and when you're out there doing the science. We're just here for those puns. I got Kira and George at the same time, and Cassie over there rolled her eyes pretty hard, so that's great. Emily, more questions from the folks out there.
Yeah, we've got folks who are curious for this kind of work that you're doing. Is a graduate degree required? What kind of schooling do you think that someone who might be interested in getting into the marine sciences might need to do work like this? It's very important, especially as our oceans keep on changing. And so it's wonderful to see so many young folks out there who are excited about possibly becoming a marine scientist.
Yeah. Well, you need at least an undergraduate, and there's people working in the marine sciences who have undergraduates, PhDs, masters, and of course the work changes a bit as you change degrees. It's not better or worse, it's just different. It depends what you really like and what you want to focus on. I'd say for a lot of our engineers here don't necessarily have graduate degrees. I'd say most, but not all of our scientists. A lot of our scientists have masters or PhDs, but and there's also lots of ways to approach it. You don't actually need a marine science degree to do marine science because it's an interdisciplinary field. Um, on the science side, there's chemists, there's physiologists, there's ecologists like me, there's um, geneticists. So it's my advice always is sort of figure out what aspect of marine science you really like early on and sort of focus on that and become an expert in that and apply it to marine science. I should say that, but I haven't followed that about half of my career too. So
That's
but,
that's awesome. Yeah, so what you're saying is that, like, similar to the ocean, when the degrees change, things also have to adapt and
yes.
change there. So yeah, sorry, it's just bad pun central over here. But no, thank you for that, Steve. I wanted to make sure that we cover all of the science and work that you're doing. Was there another big project you wanted to bring up to people to kind of show what you're doing right now with changing ocean happenings out there?
Let's just talk a little bit about the deep coral and changing ocean, which is a lot more work in progress. I'll just pop up quickly one or two things. So again, this all comes back to how organisms interact with their environment and other organisms, and that environment could either be the current environment or some future one. So we're asking those questions. We're trying to ask those questions with corals using a couple of different things. One neat thing we're doing, that's another tool we sort of throw around here, is the benthic respirometry system. So this sort of measures how hard, essentially it measures how much oxygen an organism is using. And that's sort of a measure of how it's doing in a way, sort of how its engine's running. And this is a system we deploy much like the camera trap. We drop it in the ocean and then we use the ROV to find an organism and put it in these there's 8 chambers. And there's a little picture there of us putting a coral in there. And right now we're updating that system to be able to manipulate pH. So we really want to see how in the ocean, we say in situ. So we put this down, we put a piece of coral in, and remember they're colonial organisms, so we can break off a piece and put it in. And we really want to understand sort of how they react to changing pH. So that's a tool we're using. More on the imaging side, we showed that cool picture of the rock bend image. Sorry, let me get that back up. But if you look, there's a couple little things sitting, that little yellow thing, there's a smaller one here. Those are instruments that help us understand the flow. So we put out a suite of instruments that let us know the temperature, the dissolved oxygen, the flow, and we're trying to figure out how all these factors affect the success of corals. And one thing we really are hoping to do in the future is, so we're here at sort of the mouth of the Salinas Valley, which is, the lettuce capital of the world, huge agricultural area. And ag's really, really advanced in using remote sensing to understand the health of their plants. So they do things like use drones, fly them over fields, and that image is what's called a hyperspectral image. So they're imaging at all different wavelengths of light. So instead of taking like a normal picture in color, they're taking pictures at individual wavelengths. And they can use that to understand things like, does the plant need nitrogen? Does the plant not have enough water? So that's an image of water stress. And we have this idea that either something like the Coral Cam or maybe some smaller instrument that the ROV can point at a coral can tell us something about coral health in the same way. Maybe it'll tell us how many eggs it has, how much fat's in it. So fats are important energy to corals. So we're just starting to work on that, but we think there's some promise there. So talk to me in 3 years.
Okay.
um,
Yeah, set.
but that I just wanted to say that we are also asking these questions about how climate is affecting organisms down deep. We're just using slight different tools, though we are going to loop around and try to culture, bring back corals, keep them in the lab, and use the upwelling system to do experiments there as well. So
That's fascinating. And Steve, this is new science that I'm just now finding out about right now. Not only what the ag folk are doing and able to do with that imaging, but then how it might apply to the deep sea. So this is really fascinating. Is that something that happens pretty frequently for deep sea scientists to kind of look to other industries that have maybe more, not more funding, but like more eyes and minds working on it to try to bring that technology and apply it into deep sea stuff, so you don't have to reinvent the imaging wheel every time?
I think for imaging, for sure, I think that might be a better question for Kakani than me. She's much more
Okay,
in it.
get her on the line.
But yeah, definitely, as I've started to delve into the imaging world, there's just, I mean, you think about face recognition, how much money is being put into that kind of imaging. There's just, though MBARI is a wonderful resource and there's other great oceanographic institutions, there's just so much else going out there on imaging, machine learning, hyperspectral, the ag industry is massive. So we look to it quite a bit, at least I do for this.
Fascinating. Emily, I'm gonna hop over to you, see what the folks may have been wondering here in this time. What kind of questions do we have for Steve?
Yeah, so one that I definitely want to address right now, I think that a lot of folks who are tuning in are really familiar with shallow water corals, Steve, and especially as we've just been talking about, climate change and how it's affecting our ocean and our changing ocean right now, and in particular when we talk about corals, a lot of people are now familiar with zooxanthellae. Now, when we talk about deep sea corals, that is much further away from the sunlight, where those zooxanthellae would be photosynthesizing and living in symbiosis with a coral. So, for deep sea corals, what are some of those really important things for them? Do we have to worry about bleaching with deep sea corals? And can you tell us a little bit more about the deep sea corals, just ecology in general?
So what's nice is we don't have to worry about bleaching because they don't have zooxanthellae. Yeah, so as you mentioned, there's no light. So they don't have the symbiotic algae in them. They're purely heterotrophic. Heterotrophic meaning they eat stuff. They get all their energy from eating stuff. And most of it's thought to be sort of marine snow, like you have in your background. Um, Organic matter that floats from where there is light in the ocean, where the phytoplankton is produced, floats down, and the corals eat them, though they'll also eat zooplankton, so little tiny shrimps. And that's actually one of the questions I'm really interested in is how important are different sources of organic matter to them? And we're also really interested in how changes in ocean productivity affect their growth. And though I'm not the expert in it, there's one really cool way to do that. For those of you who don't know a lot about corals, certain deep sea corals, not all of them, not like the Paragorgia, the pink stuff that you've seen in a couple pictures, but the bamboo corals grow like trees. So these are a bunch of, here is a live bamboo coral right behind me. To my right is on the Western Flyer, a bunch of skeletons of corals we've collected. And if you cut those corals across like you'd cut a tree, they have rings. You can see the center of the coral, you can see the edge. And we work with scientists, the guy in the orange jacket, that's Tom Gilderson, who can get in there and sample across the coral and get information about the growth of the coral, changes in ocean productivity over time from doing different chemical analyses. So we're trying to again, in the context of climate change, changing ocean productivity, maybe changing temperatures, how it's affecting the ecology of these corals and their growth and success. They're really slow growing.
That's awesome. I had some of the bamboo coral there playing in the background while you're mentioning that. Emily, more questions for Steve.
Yeah, we did also have some questions from folks. We were just talking about the agriculture that is close by. Do you see, runoff from that affecting our ocean at all in the studies that we've been doing at MBARI?
So I'm trying to think beyond my own work, because in my own work I haven't. We also have Elkhorn Slough here, which is, for those of you on the East Coast, a slough is an estuary. And they get a lot of nitrogen and nutrient dynamics from it. I have to admit, I'm not as familiar with with the work that's been done by MBARI on those questions. We have, I'm trying to remember, I'm trying to not mix up work from different places. So I'm not familiar with any of the work, let's say, in the canyon associated with that.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great.
And for everybody who's tuning in right now, we are currently talking to Dr. Steve Litvin of MBARI. This is the panel of MBARI folks, Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute and Monterey Bay Aquarium here. It looks like we have maybe about 10 minutes or so to go here on our time. Steve, is there anything that we really wanted to cover here before we do some rapid fire questions from the audience? Did you have more related to the bamboo coral, or more of that deep sea imagery that you wanted to cover?
No, I think you guys got a pretty good idea of sort of what we do and what we're working on. I saw a question here about crinoids. About I'm not sure if it's a question whether what eats crinoids or what eats the corals. Crinoids don't eat the corals, but other deep sea stars do. And actually, we've done some experiments of taking already knocked over corals that have some live tissue and then putting them out, taking a GPS coordinate and going back to them repeatedly over years to see what is eating them. And that's also something we hope to do with the camera system we have out, to have this idea of how corals are interacting with their predators.
That's awesome. I'm playing a crinoid behind you right now, more commonly known as a feather star, and you can see it swimming there in the back. So you got some crinoid action there behind you, Steve.
You do see them on the corals quite a bit. I think they're hanging out and feeding on plankton.
Nice. Here's some basket stars on coral that I'll just play in the background because they're just absolutely gorgeous. Emily, I'll go to you for some rapid fire questions before we wrap up here with Steve.
All right. So first rapid fire question for you, Steve. What gives deep sea corals their beautiful colors?
I don't know.
Oh.
All right. First one, and we've stumped him. Great job, chat.
What's important to point out, just for the group out there, is that this shows that there's so many different people working on the same thing, right? Because Steve, you're focused on a lot of the biochemistry and other aspects of it. So there's so much knowledge out there at this point in science that we can't all know every aspect of everything there, right?
Oh, for sure. I'm definitely interdisciplinary and not an expert in everything that I work on.
There you go. So there's hope for all of us out there for sure. Awesome. Okay, Emily, more questions.
How fast do the coral cuttings that you bring back to the lab grow?
So far, not at all, because we haven't been really successful. And this is something I'm hoping to rely on our wonderful partners at the Monterey Bay Aquarium to help me with, because they have so much experience keeping different organisms in the alive. So we haven't really focused on the lab work yet. So we brought some back, but we haven't had much easy success. So we're going to revisit that probably in the next year or so.
Very cool.
That's awesome. Emily, Emily, I don't know if you saw, we've got a rad question from Raynell again. Raynell, hello again. Yeah, sorry, go for it if you got Raynell's question lined up.
Yeah, I've got Raynell's question lined
Perfect.
up. Yeah, Steve, what do you think is the most underhyped benthic organism?
So you want my favorite underhyped?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's actually a shallow water one, and it's not really a given species. It's emergent benthic zooplankton in the kelp forest. So
whoa, describe that.
So it sounds fancy, it's not. It's emergent, so they emerge from something, benthic from the benthos, but they are zooplankton. So there's a community of zooplankton in the kelp forest that essentially live in the sediment during the day and come out at night to feed. And they're really important food resource for a bunch of animals in the kelp forest. And their role is really understudied. And there's a couple of like classic papers from the early 80s where people put out traps for these in mostly Southern California kelp forests. So when I worked more in kelp forests, I was really fascinated about their role, because you don't really read much, but what's out there hints that they're really important. And I love food webs, so I want to understand all the animals in food webs and how they're connected.
So what kind of organisms in the zooplankton are they? Are they arthropods, worms? What are we talking?
They're arthropods.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
There probably are worms. For some reason, I can't get as excited about worms. Sorry.
So emergent benthic zooplankton, or EBZs.
Yes, EBZs.
Nice.
You heard it first here.
EBZs. Shout out. Nice. Cool. Emily, more questions.
What is your favorite place that you have gone scuba diving, Steve?
So this is like sort of a like secret admission. So I never really scuba dived till about halfway into my time in California, and I don't recreationally a lot. So I don't have like a lot of exciting places, but my favorite place was actually diving in the Red Sea.
Oh, whoa.
In Eilat, but not in one of the like best places. This wasn't Sharm el Sheikh or one of the places down in Sinai, but I loved it because it was really pretty. It was a shallow coral reef, but also I have a lot of family there, and I stumbled into a project there, never thought I would work there. So I got to dive in the morning and do paddle boats with my cousin's kids in the afternoon.
Wow.
So as a whole experience, it's my favorite diving ever.
And the Red Sea may be lesser known than Indonesia to the general public, as far as the Coral Triangle is over there, right? In the Indo-Pacific, but the Red Sea, one of the most intense coral communities that anyone can really go dive in, right? Like just really amazing wildlife over there.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, that was a leading question for you, Steve. Yes.
Oh, I will say it's also my most disappointing scuba diving.
Oh no! I'm sorry.
Oh no!
Only because rumor was there was a whale shark, and I got shawarma instead.
Oh no!
Well,
you said you're all about those food webs, so it's understandable that would be the choice you make.
It's really good shawarma.
Okay.
This might lead in to our next question that we had, which was, what's something that you've always wanted to see but you haven't yet? Your white whale. It might actually just be an actual whale shark.
Right.
Says your white whale there. Shark, not whale, but
yeah.
Yeah. I would I probably wouldn't like it in the moment, but I think seeing some bigger shark in one of our our kelp forests would be amazing. Like, just absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'd like it in the moment though.
Sure.
But
Well, as long as you have a camera and then maybe like a scientific experiment, you could like
Yeah.
ask it like, "What are your opinions on climate change?" And then like as it swims away, you know, get some of that data. All right. Maybe one or two more questions here before we wrap up. Emily, what's another one?
All right. Another question that we had for you here, Steve, is if you could give advice to young people who might be interested in studying corals, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think for anyone who are interested in marine science or marine ecosystems, um, I would say start getting experience as soon as you can. I'd also say, think about what you want to do with them, in the sense that when we think about understanding coral systems or any marine system or working with them, that could again mean everything from being a chemist to being an engineer to being an economist, um, to being an artist. We all have these things we inherently like to do, and sort of finding both what you really like to do to day, and if it's the ocean, what kind of ocean ecosystem you're interested in. Connecting those is really the way to pursue a career, rather than thinking, looking at somebody's work, uh, and saying, I have to be a chemist or I have to be a mathematical modeler, which we work with mathematical modelers and they're wonderful. And, but we all don't want to stare at equations all day. So, but get experience. There's lots of ways to get experience. Particularly, and these days, no matter where you go to school, there's always those summer programs, like the MBARI summer internship. Just to give a plug to that.
Nice.
So look for those experience, make time for them, and do the work in the context of what you love.
Awesome. And I think maybe a final question, Emily. Do you have one of those? One of those types of final questions?
Actually, I think that we got to most of the questions.
Oh, okay. Well,
Patrick.
that's incredible. Well, thanks everyone for asking those questions. Steve, maybe some parting thoughts. We us here on this chat, a lot of us are on social media a lot. Obviously, everyone is reading the news, and we all are currently in this situation of coronavirus and mass disruption to our everyday lives, and similarly to mass disruption that is already happening around the world from climate change in different ecosystems, and similar to the type of disruption that might be happening going forward. So I think a lot of people are seeing a lot of very charged, very negative things about how everything is going. And clearly we're all experiencing a very difficult time. As someone who's studying the science of how the climate is changing and how humans impact it, what keeps you going and not just like piecing out and going and hanging out at the beach and just, like, well, we're done, like what? So as someone who's out there studying the science, what can you tell the folks who might be tuning in? Like, what is it like to know what's happening, and then what does the future look like?
I think in that sense, what keeps me going is, um, there's lots of resilience in the ocean. Um, that might not mean the ocean you see right outside your front door is going to be the exact same um, in 10 years, but over time, those systems have changed a ton. And, the work I've done, not so much in the deep sea, but I worked a lot in marsh restoration, salt marsh restoration back in the day. And we can make a difference. There are lots of positive things we can do. And as you talked about, all those individual things scale up, and we can do things for a healthier and more resilient planet.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. Great knowledge there, Steve. Good job on the slideshow there in the background of all that stuff. Very complimentary. To everybody out there who's on the social media feeds having their questions answered by George here, by Cassie and Kira over there. Thank you so much for all of those questions. Thank you so much for all those answers. Emily, we answered all the questions. Incredible.
We did it. I think this might be a first for our stream.
I'm not sure what that says about me, though.
No, it means you covered all of it. It's great.
Great.
Nice.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for helping out with the questions and the support. It's great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. If you want more of this style of content, Mysteries of the Deep with MBARI, it's on a playlist on MBARI's YouTube channel, on our YouTube channel, and on our Twitch VOD as well. So I don't know what episode this is. It might be episode like 8 or 9 at this point. There's plenty of science out there to study and plenty more coming from MBARI. Head over to mbari.org for more information there, and then give us a follow on all of our social media channels so you'll know when more of these talks are happening and some more ocean science. With that, everyone, thank you so much, and we hope to see and deep see you again soon at the Monterey Bay Aquarium and the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute social media feeds. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.